The rain came down in sheets, turning the London street into a river of mud and chaos. Catherine Morrison clutched her sodden cloak tighter and squinted through the downpour at the line of carriages waiting outside the theater. Her spectacles were so rain-spattered she could barely see, but the fourth carriage from the left had the Morrison family crest. She was certain of it. She lunged for the door, yanked it open, and threw herself inside with a gasp of relief. Finally! I thought I'd drown out there. Thompson, please take me home immediately. I'm soaked through and Mother will have my head if I catch a chill before... Catherine froze. The interior of the carriage was not familiar. The upholstery was deep burgundy velvet, far finer than anything her family owned. And sitting directly across from her, staring with an expression of complete astonishment, was an elderly woman in diamonds that could probably fund a small country. Not her mother. Definitely not her mother. "Oh," Catherine said faintly. "Oh dear." "My goodness," the woman said, her shock giving way to something that looked suspiciously like delight. "This is unexpected. I'm so sorry. I thought this was my family's carriage." The crest looked, but the rain. "My spectacles are... I'll just..." Catherine reached for the door handle, but the carriage lurched forward with alarming speed. "Thompson!" she called out. "Thompson, stop! This isn't... That's not Thompson," the elderly woman said, sounding far too amused for someone whose carriage had just been invaded by a dripping stranger. "That's Roberts, and I believe I've just told him to drive on." Catherine's stomach sank. "You told him to... But I don't... You can't just... Can't I? I'm the Dowager Duchess of Ashford. I can do quite a lot of things." The woman leaned forward, studying Catherine with bright, calculating eyes. "What's your name, dear?" "Catherine Morrison. Miss Catherine Morrison. And I really must insist that you stop this carriage immediately. My mother will be frantic. She's probably already looking for me." "Morrison, Earl of Blackwood's daughter?" "Yes, and..." "Perfect," the Dowager Duchess said, settling back against the velvet cushions with evident satisfaction. "Simply perfect. Tell me, Miss Morrison, are you engaged?" Catherine blinked water out of her eyes. "I beg your pardon? Engaged, betrothed, promised to anyone?" No, but I fail to see what that has to do with..." "Excellent. I knew the moment you tumbled into my carriage that Providence had intervened. Do you believe in Providence, Miss Morrison?" "I believe in checking carriage crests more carefully in the rain," Catherine said, wringing water from her cloak onto what was probably a very expensive carpet. "Your Grace, I appreciate whatever this is, but I really must get home. My mother will be informed that you're perfectly safe and currently having tea with the Dowager Duchess of Ashford. That should ease her concerns considerably." "Tea? It's nearly midnight, and I'm soaking wet." "Then we'll get you dry first. Roberts, take us to Ashford House." "Your Grace, please. Do you know why I had my driver continue when you mistakenly entered my carriage, Miss Morrison?" Catherine was beginning to suspect she'd stumbled into some sort of bizarre dream brought on by standing too long in the rain. "I genuinely have no idea." "Because my son needs a wife." There was a long pause. The carriage rattled through the London streets while Catherine tried to process what she'd just heard. "Your son," she repeated slowly. "The Duke of Ashford. 32 years old, perfectly healthy, obscenely wealthy, and stubbornly unmarried. Every matchmaking mama in London has been throwing daughters at him for a decade. He's rejected them all. How nice for him. It's not nice for me. I want grandchildren before I die. I want to see my son settled and happy. And I've just spent the entire evening watching him politely reject yet another perfectly suitable young lady because she, and I quote, had nothing interesting to say about agricultural reform." Catherine felt herself smiling despite the absurdity of the situation. "Agricultural reform? My son has interests. Unfortunately, he can't seem to find a woman who shares any of them. Every debutante he meets either simpers at him about the weather or talks of nothing but fashion and gossip. It's driving him to despair. And me to desperate measures, such as kidnapping random women from the street." The Dowager Duchess laughed, a rich, delighted sound. "You didn't scream when you realized your mistake. You didn't faint or have hysterics. You argued with me, soaking wet and without your proper carriage, and you did it with humor and backbone. That's exactly what my son needs. A woman who argues with his mother. A woman who thinks for herself, who has spirit, who won't bore him to tears within a week of marriage." The Duchess leaned forward again, and there was something almost pleading in her eyes now. "I'm not actually kidnapping you, Miss Morrison. I'm simply asking you to give me one evening. Have tea with me, get dry. Let me tell you about my son. And if, at the end of it, you want to leave, I'll have you taken home immediately with my apologies. Catherine should say no, should demand to be taken home right now, should point out that this was all highly irregular and borderline mad. But there was something about the Dowager Duchess that was impossible to resist, a warmth beneath the eccentricity, a genuine love for her son that made her willing to accost strangers in carriages. And if Catherine was being honest, her own evening had been spectacularly boring. Another theater performance where she'd sat in the back because her family couldn't afford better seats. Another night of watching other people live interesting lives while hers remained stubbornly ordinary. What harm could one cup of tea do? One evening, Catherine said, and then you take me home. One evening, the Duchess agreed, looking far too pleased with herself. I have a feeling that will be quite enough. Ashford House was exactly what Catherine expected from a ducal residence. Enormous, elegant, dripping with old money and older art. A footman appeared the moment the carriage stopped, holding an umbrella that was far too late to be useful. Good evening, Your Grace. We weren't expecting you back so soon. Plans changed, William. This is Miss Morrison. She's had a rather wet evening and needs dry clothes and hot tea immediately. Is my son home? His Grace is in the library, ma'am. Perfect. He can stay there. Miss Morrison and I will be in the blue drawing room. Catherine was whisked upstairs by a maid who didn't bat an eye at the appearance of a soggy stranger. Within 20 minutes she'd been dried, dressed in a borrowed gown that was only slightly too large, and deposited in a drawing room that probably cost more than her father's entire estate. The Dowager Duchess appeared shortly after, having changed into a fresh gown and looking entirely too energetic for someone her age at this hour. Much better, she pronounced, pouring tea from a service that was definitely actual silver. Now we can talk properly. Tell me about yourself, Miss Morrison. Shouldn't you be telling me about your son? Since that's apparently why I'm here. Oh, I will. But first I want to know who you are, beyond Earl of Blackwood's daughter. What do you care about? What interests you? Catherine accepted her teacup, still half convinced this was all some elaborate hallucination. I care about a great many things, Your Grace. Education reform, women's literacy, the appalling state of London's orphanages. Why the aristocracy seems to think poverty is a moral failing rather than a systemic problem. The Duchess's smile widened. Go on. I believe women should be able to own property in their own right. I think the current marriage laws are archaic and oppressive. I've read Mary Wollstonecraft and I agree with most of her arguments, which would scandalize half of London if they knew. And the other half would pretend they'd never heard of her. Catherine took a sip of tea. It was perfect, of course. I'm 24, which makes me firmly on the shelf by society's standards. I have a small independence from my grandmother, but not enough to live on comfortably. My father expects me to marry eventually, but he's not pushing too hard because my younger sister is far prettier and more biddable, so she'll make the better match anyway. Do you want to marry? Catherine considered the question honestly. I want partnership, companionship, someone who sees me as an equal rather than an ornament or a broodmare. But I haven't met anyone who fits that description, so I've made my peace with spinsterhood. It's not so terrible. I have my books and my charity work and my opinions that scandalize the neighbors. My son, the Duchess said quietly, would find you absolutely fascinating, or absolutely horrifying. No, Alexander values intelligence above everything else. He spent 10 years rejecting perfectly suitable young ladies because they couldn't hold a conversation beyond the weather. You just told me you've read Wollstonecraft and have opinions on property law. He'd be delighted. Unless he disagrees with my opinions. Then you'd argue about it, and he'd be even more delighted. My son doesn't want agreement. He wants engagement. Someone who challenges him. Before we continue, dear listener, tell me, where are you listening to us right now? From the kitchen while preparing lunch? From the living room, taking a well-deserved break? Or perhaps from the bedroom, relaxing after a long day? Leave it in the comments. We love knowing you're here with us. And if you're enjoying this story, if the romance is touching your heart, please tap the like button right below. It helps us so much to continue bringing beautiful stories like this to you. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe now. We have a new exciting story every week waiting for you. Now, let's return to our story, because you will not believe what happens next. Catherine set down her teacup. Your Grace, I appreciate what you're trying to do. Truly. But you can't just matchmake your son like this. He doesn't even know I exist. He will tomorrow. I'm hosting a small dinner party. You'll attend. I haven't been invited. You are now. Bring your parents if it makes it more proper. I'll send a formal invitation in the morning. And if your son takes one look at me and decides I'm completely unsuitable? The Duchess smiled. Then I'll have been wrong, which would be a novel experience. But I don't think I'm wrong, Miss Morrison. I've known my son for 32 years. I know what he needs even if he doesn't. And you, she gestured at Catherine with her teacup, stumbled into my carriage at exactly the right moment. That's not coincidence. That's fate. That's nearsightedness in the rain. Call it what you like. Will you come to dinner? Catherine should say no. Should walk out of this beautiful house and forget this entire bizarre evening ever happened. Should return to her ordinary life with her ordinary prospects and her extraordinary opinions that no one wanted to hear. But when would she ever get another chance like this? To meet a duke who supposedly valued intelligence. To spend an evening in a world far above her usual station. To see if maybe, just maybe, the Dowager Duchess of Ashford wasn't completely mad. One dinner, Catherine said. And if your son and I are completely incompatible, you'll never mention this again. Agreed, though I suspect you'll be begging me for a second dinner by the end of the first. Your confidence is staggering. My instincts are excellent. Now let me tell you about Alexander. The next evening, Catherine stood outside Ashford House in her best evening gown, which was still hopelessly provincial compared to what the other guests would be wearing, and tried to remember how to breathe. You look lovely, dear, her mother said, adjusting Catherine's shawl for the third time. Though I still don't understand how you came to be invited. The Dowager Duchess of Ashford doesn't typically move in our circles. I helped her with something, Catherine said vaguely. She was grateful, her father snorted. Grateful enough to invite us to dinner with the Duke of Ashford. This could be very good for your sister's prospects, Catherine. Do try not to monopolize the conversation with your opinions. I'll do my best, father. Inside, Ashford House was even more impressive lit for a dinner party. Crystal chandeliers threw rainbow light across marble floors. Liveried servants glided through hallways hung with paintings Catherine recognized from her art history books. And standing in the drawing room, speaking with two other gentlemen, was a man who could only be the Duke of Ashford. Catherine's first thought was that he looked tired. Her second was that he was handsome in an austere sort of way. Tall, dark-haired, with features that were more interesting than classically perfect. Her third thought was that he looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Ah, there you are. The Dowager Duchess descended on Catherine's family with terrifying efficiency. Lord and Lady Blackwood, how delightful. And Miss Morrison, you look charming. Come, let me introduce you to everyone. Alexander. The Duke turned, and Catherine watched recognition flicker in his eyes. Not recognition of her specifically, they'd never met, but recognition of what was happening. His mother was matchmaking again. His expression became carefully neutral. Alexander, this is Lord and Lady Blackwood, and their daughter, Miss Catherine Morrison. Miss Morrison, my son, the Duke of Ashford. Your Grace, Catherine said, curtsying. Thank you for having us. The pleasure is mine, Alexander said, and he sounded like he meant it about as much as someone facing execution might mean. I'm looking forward to this. This was a disaster. He clearly wanted nothing to do with whatever scheme his mother had concocted. Catherine could feel her face heating with embarrassment. Miss Morrison, the Duchess said brightly, was just telling me last night about her work with the Foundling Hospital. She's been developing a literacy program for the children. Alexander, didn't you recently donate to expand their facilities? I did, Alexander said, and now there was a flicker of genuine interest in his eyes, though I wasn't aware they had a formal literacy program. They didn't, Catherine said. That's why I started one. Most people assume orphans don't need education, but that's precisely backward. Education is what allows them to rise above their circumstances. I've been saying that for years, Alexander said, and there was warmth in his voice now. Most of the trustees disagree. They think basic arithmetic and Bible verses are sufficient. Basic arithmetic and Bible verses create servants, not citizens. If we want these children to have real opportunities, they need to read, write, and think critically. Exactly. Alexander took a step closer, and Catherine realized he'd completely forgotten they were supposed to be making polite small talk. But the funding is always the challenge. The trustees won't approve money for books when they can barely cover food and housing. Then we work around the trustees. I've been soliciting book donations from families whose children have outgrown them. We have almost 200 volumes now. It's not enough, but it's a start. That's brilliant. Have you tried approaching the publishers directly? Some might donate damaged stock or overruns. I hadn't thought of that. Do you think they would? I can make inquiries. I know several publishers who might be sympathetic to the cause. They were interrupted by the butler announcing dinner. But Catherine noticed that Alexander maneuvered to escort her to the dining room and arranged for her to be seated near him at the table. The Dowager Duchess caught Catherine's eye and smiled like a cat who'd gotten into the cream. Dinner was a blur of courses and conversation. Catherine found herself talking more than she ever did at these events, drawn out by Alexander's genuine interest in her opinions. They debated education reform, discussed the new poor laws, argued amiably about agricultural innovations, and somehow ended up in a spirited conversation about whether Byron was a genius or simply very good at marketing himself. Marketing himself, Catherine insisted. Half his poems are just him brooding attractively about his own supposed wickedness. It's very calculated, but the other half are genuinely brilliant. Alexander countered. Childe Harold is a masterpiece regardless of Byron's personal theatrics. I'll grant you Childe Harold. But The Corsair is pure melodrama. Melodrama can still be art. Can it, though? Alexander laughed, and Catherine realized with a start that he looked completely different when he smiled. Less austere, more approachable, almost boyish despite being in his 30s. You're the first person I've met in years who's willing to argue with me about poetry, he said. Should I apologize? Absolutely not. It's refreshing. Across the table, the Dowager Duchess looked ready to start planning a wedding. After dinner, the ladies retired to the drawing room while the men had their port. Catherine's mother immediately cornered her. Catherine, what on earth are you doing? Talking to the Duke? You told me to make a good impression. I told you not to monopolize the conversation. You've been arguing with him all evening. He seems to enjoy it. Men don't enjoy being contradicted by women. You'll ruin your sister's chances if you make him think our family is full of blue stockings. Catherine bit back a sharp retort. Her mother meant well, but she fundamentally misunderstood what had just happened. Alexander hadn't been offended by Catherine's opinions. He'd been engaged by them, energized, alive in a way he clearly wasn't during normal social interactions. But trying to explain that to her mother would be pointless. When the men rejoined them, Alexander made directly for Catherine. Would you care to see the library? He asked. I have several first editions of Wollstonecraft that might interest you. Catherine's mother looked faint. Proper young ladies did not go alone to libraries with unmarried dukes. But before she could object, the Dowager Duchess intervened. What a lovely idea. I'll chaperone, of course. Can't have any impropriety. She winked at Catherine, who had to suppress a laugh. The library was everything Catherine had ever dreamed of. Floor-to-ceiling shelves, leather-bound volumes, the smell of old paper and possibilities. Alexander walked her through his collection, pointing out rare editions and favorite volumes, talking about books with the kind of passion most men reserved for horses or hunting. You really have all of Wollstonecraft, Catherine breathed, running her fingers along the spines. I've only been able to borrow A Vindication of the Rights of Woman from a friend. I've never seen her other works. Borrow them, Alexander said immediately. Or better yet, keep them. I can get other copies. I couldn't possibly. Please. These books should be read, not just collected. And I can't think of anyone who would appreciate them more. Catherine looked up at him, and something passed between them. An understanding. A connection that went beyond books and literacy programs and shared opinions about Byron. He saw her. Really saw her. Not as Lord Blackwood's daughter or a potential wife or a woman who should smile and agree with everything he said, but as herself, Catherine, with all her thoughts and passions and arguments intact. It was intoxicating. Thank you, she said quietly. That's very generous. It's entirely selfish. Now I'll have an excuse to see you again when you return them. The Dowager Duchess, who'd been pretending to examine a globe in the corner, made a small, satisfied sound. And you, dear listener, what would you do in Catherine's place? Have you lived through something similar? Do you know someone who went through a situation like this? Tell your story in the comments. We read each one with affection and love knowing your experiences. And if this story is making you sigh, smile, or even shed a tear, share it with someone special. Think of that friend, sister, or daughter who would also love this journey. Send her the link. Love is meant to be shared, isn't it? But let's return, because what is about to happen will leave you speechless. Over the next 2 weeks, Catherine saw more of Alexander than was probably proper. He called on her family 3 times, taking tea in their modest drawing room and apparently not noticing that the furniture was shabby and the carpet worn. He invited her to a lecture on agricultural innovations that would have bored most young ladies to tears but which Catherine found fascinating. They argued about crop rotation and land enclosure and whether industrialization was ultimately good or bad for the working class. Catherine's father was confused but pleased. Her mother was convinced catastrophe was imminent. Her younger sister Emma was gleefully planning what she'd wear to Catherine's wedding. "You're getting ahead of yourselves," Catherine told Emma one morning as they walked in the park. "We're friends, that's all. Friends who stare at each other when they think no one's looking. We don't." "You absolutely do. And he smiles at you in a way I've never seen him smile at anyone. Catherine, the Duke of Ashford is courting you. How are you not more excited?" Because Catherine was terrified. Terrified that this was too good to be true. Terrified that she'd wake up and discover it had all been a dream brought on by stepping into the wrong carriage in the rain. Terrified that Alexander would suddenly realize she was just an earl's daughter with no fortune and radical opinions, and he could do so much better. "What if I'm not what he thinks I am?" Catherine admitted quietly. "What if he's built me up into something I can't maintain?" "Then he's an idiot," Emma said loyally. "But I don't think he is. I think he sees exactly who you are and loves it." Love. Was it love? Catherine didn't know. She knew she thought about him constantly. Knew she looked forward to his visits with an intensity that bordered on absurd. Knew that when he laughed at something she said, she felt like she'd accomplished something more important than anything else in her day. But love? That was a big word. A dangerous word. She was still wrestling with it when Alexander invited her to ride with him in Hyde Park. Properly chaperoned, of course, with a groom following at a discreet distance. "I've been thinking," Alexander said as they trotted through Rotten Row, "about the Foundling Hospital program." "Oh, what if we expanded it? Not just literacy, but a full curriculum. History, mathematics, sciences. Everything a proper school would teach." Catherine's heart leaped. "That would be wonderful, but the funding, I'll fund it. Not as charity, but as investment. These children are England's future. Educating them properly isn't kindness. It's good sense. The trustees will never approve. Then we'll work around the trustees. Start small. Prove the concept works. Once we have results, they'll have to acknowledge it. We." He kept saying we. Like this was something they'd do together. Like he'd already decided she was part of his future. Catherine's hands tightened on the reins. "Alexander, I know what you're going to say. That this is moving too fast. That we barely know each other. That I'm a duke and you're an earl's daughter and society has expectations." He pulled his horse to a stop in a quiet area of the park. "But none of that matters to me. Do you know what I've realized over the past 2 weeks?" "What?" "I've been looking for you my entire adult life. Someone who challenges me, who cares about the same things I do, who doesn't want me for my title or my money, but for myself, who makes me laugh and makes me think and makes me want to be better than I am." "Your mother put me in your path," Catherine said, trying to be practical even as her heart raced. "I literally stumbled into her carriage by accident. That's not fate. That's nearsightedness in the rain. I don't care how it happened. I'm just grateful it did." He reached over and took her hand. "Propriety be damned. Catherine, I'm not good at this, at romance and pretty speeches, but I know what I want, and I want you. Not someday, not eventually. Now, now," Catherine repeated faintly. "Marry me. Be my Duchess. We'll fight about Byron and reform the education system and scandalize half of London with our progressive ideas. We'll be partners, equals, everything marriage should be, and so rarely is." Catherine looked at him. This duke who'd appeared in her life 2 weeks ago because she'd climbed into the wrong carriage, who valued her mind as much as her company, who wanted to change the world and thought she could help him do it. She should be cautious, should ask for more time, should consider all the practical implications of marrying so far above her station. But when she looked at Alexander, all she could think was yes. Yes to everything. Yes to him and the life they could build together and the changes they could make. Yes to partnership and challenge, and someone who saw her, really saw her, and loved what he saw. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." Alexander's smile was brilliant. He looked like a man who'd just won something infinitely precious. "Thank God. I was terrified you'd say no." "Why would I say no?" "Because I'm rushing you. Because you barely know me. Because my mother essentially kidnapped you." Catherine laughed. "Your mother is the best kidnapper I've ever met. I'll be sure to tell her you said so." They rode back to his townhouse, where the Dowager Duchess took one look at their faces and started planning a wedding. "I knew it," she crowed. "The moment you fell into my carriage, I knew. Providence, Miss Morrison. I told you it was Providence. You told me it was fate. Same thing. Alexander, I assume you've proposed properly? I proposed in Hyde Park while on horseback. It was not remotely proper. But she accepted, so I'll forgive the lack of poetry. When's the wedding? Mother, a month should be sufficient. Any longer and people will talk. Any shorter, and it looks rushed. People will talk regardless, Alexander said. I'm marrying an earl's daughter instead of someone more suitable. You're marrying someone perfect for you, the Duchess corrected. Anyone who suggests otherwise can take it up with me. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. She'd worried about being accepted by Alexander's family, about being seen as a fortune hunter or social climber. But the Dowager Duchess was looking at her with such genuine warmth, such obvious delight, that all those fears melted away. Thank you, Catherine said quietly, for everything. If you hadn't told Roberts to keep driving that night, then my son would still be rejecting perfectly suitable young ladies, and I'd still be despairing of grandchildren. We should both be grateful for your terrible sense of direction. The engagement was announced in the Times the following week, causing a sensation throughout London society. The Duke of Ashford, one of England's most eligible bachelors, was marrying Catherine Morrison, daughter of the Earl of Blackwood. A perfectly respectable match, but hardly the brilliant alliance everyone had expected. The gossip was immediate and ferocious. She must have trapped him somehow, Lady Pemberton declared at her weekly tea. No duke marries an earl's daughter without being compromised. I heard she's extraordinarily clever, Mrs. Hartwell offered. Perhaps he values intelligence over connections. Intelligence, Lady Pemberton sniffed. What good is intelligence in a duchess? She'll be expected to host parties and produce heirs, not write essays about social reform. But there were others who saw the match differently, who noticed how Alexander looked at Catherine when they appeared together at social events, who observed that the notoriously serious Duke smiled more in one evening with his fiancée than he had in the previous 10 years combined. He's in love with her, Lady Hertford told anyone who would listen. Really in love. Not the polite affection of most society marriages, but genuine devotion. It's actually quite beautiful. Catherine tried to ignore the gossip, both positive and negative. She had more important things to worry about, like the fact that she was marrying a duke in less than a month, like the realization that she'd be the Duchess of Ashford, responsible for managing enormous households and hosting important political dinners and navigating the treacherous waters of high society. I don't know how to be a duchess, she confessed to Alexander one afternoon as they reviewed wedding plans in his mother's drawing room. Neither did my mother when she married my father. She learned, your mother is naturally gracious and elegant. I argue about philosophy and get ink stains on my fingers. My mother, the Dowager Duchess interjected from her position by the window, was a vicar's daughter who'd never set foot in a ducal residence before her wedding day. I learned to be a duchess because I had to. You'll do the same. Though, truthfully, I think you'll redefine what a duchess should be rather than conforming to outdated expectations. That's what I'm hoping, Alexander said, taking Catherine's hand. The world doesn't need another duchess who simply smiles and nods through dinner parties. It needs someone who will use her position to make real change. Education reform, women's rights, all the causes you care about. Being a duchess gives you a platform. Use it. Society will be scandalized. Society has survived worse scandals than a duchess with opinions. He squeezed her hand. You're not entering this alone, Catherine. We're in it together. Partners, remember? Partners. That's what they'd promised each other. Not the traditional marriage where the husband led and the wife followed, but genuine partnership. Two people working together toward common goals. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The wedding preparations continued at a dizzying pace. Catherine was fitted for gowns, introduced to the upper echelons of society, taught the subtle art of managing servants and organizing events. The Dowager Duchess proved to be an invaluable ally, defending Catherine against the more vicious gossips and teaching her the unwritten rules that govern their world. The key, she told Catherine one afternoon, is to know which rules matter and which ones can be bent. Arriving precisely on time to a ball matters. Having radical opinions about women's education, bend that rule. Break it entirely if necessary. The only people who will object are the ones whose opinions don't matter anyway. And how do I tell which opinions matter? If they come from people who value kindness and progress over rigid tradition, they matter. Everyone else can be safely ignored. It was the best advice Catherine received during the entire engagement period. We're almost reaching the end of this exciting journey. But if you love the romance of Catherine and Alexander, I have wonderful news. We have dozens of other stories waiting for you here on the channel. Breathtaking historical romances, heartwarming second chances, unlikely loves that seem impossible until they happen. Each story more exciting than the last. After finishing this one, scroll down and check out our playlists. I'm sure you'll find your next favorite story. And don't forget, activate the notification bell. That way, you receive an alert whenever we publish a new story. Because let's be honest, you already know you'll want the next one, right? Now yes, let's get to the moment you were waiting for, the ending your heart asked for. The wedding took place on a perfect spring morning at St. George's Church in Hanover Square. Catherine wore cream silk and carried white roses, and when she walked down the aisle on her father's arm, Alexander looked at her like she was the only person in the entire world. They spoke their vows clearly, promised to love and honor and cherish. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, when Alexander kissed her gently in front of God and half of London society, Catherine felt something settle in her chest. This was real. This was happening. She'd stepped into the wrong carriage and stumbled into the right life. The wedding breakfast was held at Ashford House, and Catherine was touched to see that Alexander had invited the children from the Foundling Hospital. They sat at a special table, dressed in their best clothes, eyes wide at the splendor around them. "That's your Duchess now," she heard one whisper to another. "She's the one who teaches us to read. She's a real Duchess? The realest one there is." Catherine made her way over to them, ignoring the scandalized looks from some of the more traditional guests. "Are you enjoying the party?" "It's the best thing ever," a girl named Mary said. "We've never had cake this good." "Then you should have more," Catherine said, signaling a servant to bring additional slices. "This is your party too. You're all part of our family now." Alexander appeared at her elbow, smiling at the children. "Your new Duchess is right. This hospital expansion we've been planning, it's not charity. It's investment in all of you. We're going to make sure you have every opportunity to succeed. Because education creates citizens," Mary recited, clearly quoting something Catherine had told her. Exactly right. Later, when the guests had finally departed and they were alone in the carriage heading to Thornfield Estate for their honeymoon, Catherine leaned against Alexander's shoulder. "Your mother is going to be insufferable about how right she was. She's already planning to tell everyone who'll listen about her brilliant matchmaking skills. She was brilliant, though. I'd have never met you otherwise. You'd have met me eventually, probably at some tedious society function where we'd have had a perfectly polite conversation and never seen each other again. So it took your mother's kidnapping to create this. Matchmaking, not kidnapping. Though the line is admittedly thin." Alexander pulled her closer. "Do you regret it? The speed of everything? We've only known each other 6 weeks. Catherine thought about it honestly. "I regret that I didn't have more time to prepare, that my family is still in shock, that half of London probably thinks I trapped you somehow. But do I regret marrying you? Not for a second." "Good, because I would have married you after 2 weeks if society would have allowed it." 2 weeks? That's scandalously fast. I knew after 2 days. The rest was just confirming what I already suspected, which was that you're extraordinary. That life with you would be everything I'd been looking for without knowing I was looking. That letting you go would be the stupidest thing I could possibly do." Catherine tilted her head up to kiss him, tender and sweet. "Your mother is going to be so smug. She deserves to be. She found me exactly what I needed, even if it was by accident, especially because it was by accident. The best things in life usually are." They arrived at Thornfield as the sun was setting, painting the estate in gold and rose. Catherine had visited once before the wedding, but it still took her breath away. The main house dated back 3 centuries, all stone and elegance, surrounded by formal gardens and ancient oaks. "This is home now," Alexander said, helping her down from the carriage. "All of it. Change anything you like. This is as much yours as mine." Catherine looked at the house, at the estate stretching in every direction, at her husband smiling at her in the fading light. 6 weeks ago, she'd been climbing into the wrong carriage in the rain. Now she stood on the steps of a ducal estate as the Duchess of Ashford. Life was strange and wonderful and full of possibilities she'd never dared imagine. "Show me everything," she said, taking Alexander's hand. "I want to see it all." He led her through rooms filled with history and art and the accumulated treasures of generations. But Catherine noticed he paid special attention to one room in particular, the library. "I had some additions made," he said, opening the door. The library had been impressive before. Now it was extraordinary. An entire new section had been added, filled with books on education theory, social reform, women's rights. Every volume Catherine had ever mentioned wanting to read was there, along with dozens more she'd never heard of. "Alexander," she breathed. "This must have cost a fortune. Worth every penny if you use it. This is your space, your library, where you can think and read and write and plan how we're going to change the world." Catherine felt tears in her eyes. "I don't deserve this. You deserve everything, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you get it." He pulled her close, and Catherine went willingly, resting her head against his chest and listening to his heartbeat. "Steady, sure, real. I love you," she said quietly. "I don't think I've said that yet." "You haven't, but I knew anyway." "How?" "Because you argue with me about Byron. Because you light up when you talk about the hospital children. Because you look at me like I'm not a duke, just Alexander. That's love, Catherine. The real kind." "I love you too," she said. "Just so we're clear. Very clear." They stood together in the library as darkness fell outside. Two people who'd found each other through pure chance and decided to build something permanent from it. Their wedding night was spent in the Duchess's chambers, which had been completely redecorated according to Catherine's preferences. Alexander had somehow discovered her favorite colors, her love of books within arm's reach, her preference for comfort over ostentation. "You paid attention," Catherine said, looking around the room that was somehow both elegant and welcoming. "I always pay attention to you," Alexander said. "It's impossible not to." What followed was tender and careful, two people learning each other with patience and gentle humor. When Catherine stumbled over her nervousness, Alexander made her laugh. When he worried about hurting her, she reassured him with touches and whispered words. They fumbled and discovered and created something beautiful together. "This is what marriage should be," Catherine said afterward, lying in Alexander's arms as the first light of dawn painted the room in soft gold. "Partnership, friendship, this, Alexander agreed, kissing her forehead. "Always this." Years later, when people asked Catherine how she'd met her husband, she'd smile and say she'd climbed into the wrong carriage, and the Dowager Duchess decided you were perfect for her son. They'd ask, delighted by the story. "She decided I had potential. The rest was up to us." But it worked out. It worked out perfectly. And Alexander would add that sometimes the best things in life came from mistakes, from wrong turns and rainy nights and mothers who refused to accept that their sons might be stubborn. Their children would roll their eyes at the story, having heard it hundreds of times, but they'd smile too, because they knew it was true, knew their parents had built something real from an accident, knew that love didn't always follow the expected path. Sometimes love burst into your carriage soaking wet and arguing about agricultural reform. And if you were smart, you held on tight and never let go. The Foundling Hospital program expanded beyond anything Catherine had initially imagined. Within 5 years, they had a full curriculum. Within 10, they'd opened 3 additional schools. The children they taught went on to become teachers themselves, merchants, even scholars. One of them, a girl named Mary who'd attended the wedding breakfast, became the first female professor at Cambridge. She wrote Catherine letters thanking her for proving that education could change everything. Catherine kept those letters in her desk, reading them whenever she needed a reminder of why the work mattered. Alexander supported every initiative, every expansion, every radical idea Catherine proposed. They argued about implementation and timing and strategy, but never about the core goal, never about whether education and opportunity should be available to everyone. The Dowager Duchess lived to see 4 grandchildren, all of whom she spoiled terribly. She never let anyone forget that she'd orchestrated the entire romance through sheer force of will and strategic carriage deployment. "I told you it was Providence," she'd say, holding her newest grandchild. "The moment Catherine fell into my carriage, I knew." "Mother, you keep changing the story," Alexander would protest. "Sometimes it's Providence. Sometimes it's fate. Sometimes it's your brilliant instincts. It's all 3. And I was right. Admit it. You were right," Catherine would say, kissing her mother-in-law's cheek. "Though next time you want to kidnap someone, perhaps warn them first? Warn them. Where's the fun in that?" And really, Catherine had to admit, there was something perfect about how it had all happened. The rain, the wrong carriage, the eccentric Duchess who'd seen potential in a soaking wet stranger. She'd stumbled into that carriage with no expectations beyond getting home. She'd stumbled out of it with a future she'd never dared to imagine. Sometimes the wrong path led exactly where you needed to be. Catherine became known throughout London not as a conventional duchess, but as a force for change. She wrote essays under her own name about education reform and women's rights. She hosted salons where artists and intellectuals gathered to discuss radical ideas. She used her position to advocate for the powerless and challenge the comfortable. Society was indeed scandalized. It was also forced to pay attention. The Duchess of Ashford has opinions. They'd whisper at parties. Some said it with disdain, others with grudging respect, a few with genuine admiration. Catherine didn't particularly care which. She had work to do, a husband who supported her completely, and the resources to make real change. That was enough. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Alexander surprised her with a gift, not jewels or gowns, but something far more precious. A fully funded women's college, with Catherine Morrison Thornton, Duchess of Ashford, named as its founding patroness. "You said education creates citizens," Alexander explained as they stood outside the beautiful new building. "I thought we should create more of them. Female citizens who can think and lead and change the world." Catherine couldn't speak, could only stare at the building that represented everything she'd been fighting for, everything she believed in. "You did this," she finally managed. "For me, for us, for all the girls who deserve the same opportunities you had, for the future we're building together." She kissed him then, there on the steps of the college, not caring who might see, tender and loving and full of a decade's worth of partnership and joy. "I love you," she said, "even more than I did that first day in the library when you offered me your books. I love you too. Even more than I did that rainy night when my mother told me she'd found me the perfect wife in her carriage. She really is insufferable about being right. She really is. But I'm grateful for it every single day." And so ends the story of Catherine and Alexander. A journey about seizing unexpected opportunities and finding love in the most unlikely circumstances. About mothers who meddle with the best intentions and the magic that can happen when you're brave enough to say yes to the unknown. About partnerships built on mutual respect and shared purpose. About climbing into the wrong carriage and finding the right life. I hope this story touched your heart as much as it touched mine bringing it to you. If it moved you, if you sighed, if you smiled along with our characters, leave your like. It motivates us to continue. And tell us in the comments, what was your favorite moment? What touched you most? We want to know. Each comment is read with affection. Are you missing it already? Don't worry. We have a new story coming very soon. Subscribe and activate notifications so you don't miss it. And while you wait, explore our channel. We have so many other beautiful stories waiting for you. Thank you so much for your company, for choosing to spend this time with us, for opening your heart to one more love story. Until the next journey, dear listener. May your heart always be open to love, to hope, and to the good moments life reserves for us. A warm hug, and see you soon. Claude é uma IA e pode cometer erros. Por favor, verifique as respostas. Sonnet 4.5 Clau.